It's 1980 and the Dakar Rally is approaching its second ever finish line. On the horizon, a faint light can be seen in the distance. As it gets bigger and bigger, people are left in awe. It wasn't a motorcycle, it was a scooter. None other than a Vespa. A little city commuter just got to the finish line of the world's toughest rally.
Les scooters Vespa en action. Bien pilotés et assistés, ils se comporteront très honorablement.
What people didn't see was the monumental effort behind this achievement. 4 daredevils launched on this adventure in Paris, following the vision of a man whose vocabulary had never seen the word can't.
What went down is one of Dakar's greatest, most beautiful stories. A story of adventure and taking the human body beyond its limits. At the same time, a story that, behind closed curtains, hides a plethora of scandals and cheating allegations. This is the time when Vespas conquered the Dakar. While the first edition of the rally was more of an experiment, the second one was going to be taken a lot more seriously. The media caught wind of the event and got more and more eyeballs on it.
And because of the success of the first event, there were now more competitors, 216 to be precise.
Not many understood its potential back in the day, but one man did, Jean-François Piot. At that time, the Frenchman was responsible for the PR department at Honda, and during the first rally, he had personally flown to Africa to watch it with his own eyes.
Look, Piot always had plenty of weird, funky ideas for promoting his motorcycles. And with Honda, that was easier, as their bikes were more versatile. But in 1979, he jumped ship to Piaggio.
Obviously, the marketing strategy for a scooter company is usually wildly different.
Discover a sensible excitement, Vespa, the classic beauty that leads a lively double life.
But does it have to be? Piot decided to take the Italian brand and put it for challenges that were never expected. Vespas took part in the Green Cruise or the Tour de France, and one day, Piot remembered that crazy rallying event he had witnessed. So, why couldn't a Vespa take part in it as well?
Obviously, the audience for Dakar was not necessarily the same one that would desire a Vespa. At the end, finishing a rally has nothing to do with city scooters. But doing such an obnoxious challenge would prove how sturdy and reliable the Italian machines could be.
In a way, if they could get through it, imagine how bulletproof they'd be roaming around the streets of Paris. And I mean, how hard could it be? First of all, the bikes. Piot chose the Vespa 200 as their base, but Piaggio was going to extensively modify it at the factory. They reinforced parts of the chassis, its forks and shock. They fitted wider handlebars while removing any unnecessary components to save on weight. An extra fuel tank had to be added and knobby tires were mounted on the little 12-inch wheels. They changed a lot of parts, but not everything. In fact, the engineers forgot about one crucial part that
almost ended the Vespa's story in its early days. But back to the plans. The bikes were acquired, now Piot needed someone to ride them. He built a team composed of 4 people, as more riders meant more chances of finishing.
And those riders were some of the best. Ivan Chernyavsky was the previous year French Enduro champion. His brother Bernard was also a professional rider. Marc Simoneau had a second-place podium finish in the International Enduro Championship. They even got Bernard Neymer, the previous year's 8th overall Dakar finisher. This was, by all means, a dream team. Some of the best riders on the planet. And after 2 weekends of testing the scooters on a local beach, the team was ready to show up in Paris. The Vespas were on the hunt. A cold January winter morning awaited the Frenchmen. They had to put on all their clothes just to get through the prologue. You see, this European stage was important as it set the starting order for the remaining African ones. As the Vespas left one by one, right before the finish line, the first one stopped. Then the second, third, and finally fourth.
During the race, they were not moving, chatting around. Only after a few minutes did they decide to continue and actually cross that finish line. I bet you're wondering, why? why did they lose all that time? What were they thinking?
In reality, they knew exactly what they were doing. Because all along, this was part of Piot's plan. The mastermind knew that simply taking a scooter to Dakar was futile, so he devised a strategy that would take them all the way to Senegal.
Here's the thing. As important as those Vespas were, Piot had another fleet of arguably even more important vehicles.
5 V8 Land Rovers were commissioned to be part of the assistance team. But it wasn't that easy. Back then, assistance crews weren't really a thing. If you wanted to follow the racers, you had to be part of racing. That's how the first truck category was founded, as support crews would race each other. And that's what the assistance Land Rovers had to do, sign up for the rally. But their placement wouldn't matter. In fact, every Vespa had one dedicated support vehicle, plus an extra 5th one to carry more tools, spares, and camping gear. Every co-driver of these Land Rovers had to be an Italian mechanic from the factory, as they expected breakdowns to be a frequent issue.
You see, Piot didn't just jump headfirst into this. In fact, it was a plan that took months to put in place. Here is where the Frenchman's PR genius stepped into play.
Since they were so heavily invested in the support trucks, he decided to assemble a world-class driver team for them, one that, by itself, could gather the media's attention. Between them, these drivers had won events in Formula 2 and 3, in the 24 Hours of Le Mans and global rallying events. And Piot was one of those drivers too. This entire stunt cost Piaggio a lot of money, so everything had to fit just right.
In fact, those chosen pilots, they didn't just happen to be fast. No, they needed to be world-class for the Vespa plan to work. Going back to that prologue, Piot knew it was essential for the Landies to stick close to their respective Vespas.
But there was a problem. For the African stages, the bikes would all depart first, followed by the pack of cars, one by one. And that was the problem. In order for the bikes and support vehicles to be close, the Vespas had to finish last, while the support teams had to be within the first. That's why the Vespa team stopped to chat before the finish line. That part was easy. But now, for the French prologue, the Land Rover drivers had to prove their worth, to stick their cars in top positions. And to the occasion, they rose. 3 of them managed to get inside the top 20 cars. Their plan worked like a charm. This team was in the best position to take a Vespa all the way to Dakar. Less than 10 kilometers into the first African stage, disaster struck. You see, Piot made a huge mistake. Puncture after puncture, the little wheels were dropping like flies. And those Vespas broke down before their support Landies got within sight, mixing up the plans.
Sure, when they got there, the vehicles had plenty of spares ready to go. But it's like, has no one thought of the fact that the desert rocks will obliterate the tiny tires? In fact, they did. And that's when the team realized the actual mistake. It wasn't the rocks that were chewing through the rubber, it was the Vespa itself.
You see, when the factory reinforced the bikes, they skipped on one aspect. A little rubber bushing holding the rear suspension in place. But with the dust and shocks, that rubber quickly gave up, making the wheel touch the inner arches and rubbing off the tire. Piot quickly ordered the factory in Italy to manufacture new, improved parts, but those would only arrive during the rest day. Until then, they had to keep on going, to push through. And so they did. The first day, riders spent roughly 9 hours in the saddle. The next stages, those were even worse, sometimes these heroes having to push and wrestle the scooters for 14 hours on the track. Bernard also managed to crash on the second day, badly injuring his shoulder. Everybody on board the project was completely exhausted, drained out.
As the rest day came about, the Vespa team was running on borrowed energy and willpower. Well, almost all of them, with the exception of Jean-François Piot. He wasn't just any PR guy from Piaggio. He was, in fact, a rally racer.
And a damn good one too. Starting his career at 19, he went for navigator positions until getting his own drive. He got great results in French and international scenes, cementing his name with a class second place finish at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. He was not just another corporate guy, he had racing flowing through his veins. And when he saw the Dakar in its inception, that blood quickly turned into a sandy color. That's when this desert rally became an obsession for him. He had the experience, he knew the rules, and also where to bend them. Because Piot's goal was noble.
Does the purpose excuse the means? That's for you to judge. Piot wanted, no, I take that back. He needed to have a Vespa sitting triumphantly on the podium of Lac Rose, no matter the cost. As the Algerian stages came about, the team faced their biggest fear, gigantic dunes.
As the riders got to the sandy playground, they were in deep trouble. It was obvious that tiny little scooters were never made for this. They worked together, the Land Rover support trucks came in to help, they pushed and pulled the little Vespas all day, and kept on doing so. But the day only had so many hours, and those were slowly fading away. As nighttime encroached on them, the team realized they were still 150 kilometers away from the finish line. They wouldn't make it in time. All of that effort was slowly draining away in the middle of the desert.
That's when Piot made a highly controversial decision. He loaded up the Vespas inside the Land Rovers and together they crossed the dunes. After that section, they unloaded the riders and let them take the finish themselves. This was the first time when the Vespas simply could not go any further. But their problems were far from over.
Because now, the scooters had to navigate their way back to the finish line in pitch black darkness. Their own headlights were close to worthless, so the support trucks had to drive meters behind them and shine a light to guide their way. Many times the riders fell off and almost got run over by their own support crews. After a day spent at the edge of purgatory, the crews arrived in the bivouac. Tired, exhausted, ready for this ordeal to end.
Now, Piot's decision was arguably not that fair. I mean, the bikes didn't run under their own power through the dunes. That doesn't take anything away from their effort though. The problem is, some competitors arrived after the little Vespas, but were left wondering how, as the scooters had never overtaken them.
Ultimately, this was against the letter of the law, but it is part of their story of racing. Back then, rules were kind of meant to be broken. It was the Wild West. For better or for worse, they lacked the sanitized environment of the modern era. And what is clear, despite this, everyone involved had to push themselves beyond the limit to see this project succeed, because their troubles were still far from over. During one of the stages, Bernard managed to arrive in the bivouac at 8:20 AM, just 10 minutes before the start time of the next stage. He only got 1 hour of sleep and continued their rally, and the mechanics were in no better shape. They had to sleep in the cars while driving, as the rest of their time was spent working on Vespas. They were supposed to act as navigators for the support vehicles as well, but they would simply fall asleep in the passenger seat.
Piot never expected this to be easy, but what they got far exceeded anyone's expectations. He had to fight with Dakar's founder, Thierry Sabine, as he wanted to disqualify them multiple times. Issue after issue, they just never stopped.
It's the last stage on Lac Rose. In 1980, Ivan abandoned as allegedly the rally got the better of him. Bernard Neymer broke his scooter in half, and while the mechanics tried to weld it together with a metal bar, the repair didn't last for long. Bernard abandoned as well. After his second stage crash, the other Bernard, Chernyavsky, decided to take it easy. And that was working, until his engine blew up on the last day. Again, the support Land Rover tried to fix it, but it just broke again. Ultimately, he finished the race, but in the back of a Land Rover. 3 out of 4 Vespas were kind of out.
All hopes laid upon Marc Simoneau, the youngster of the group. He was a boy who never complained and always took advantage of any minute's worth of rest he could. He pushed through, and out of everyone, he was the only Vespa rider to finish that year on his own 2 wheels.
Out of 4 scooters, technically speaking, 2 of them finished. To put it into context, that year, 85 motorcycles lined up in Paris. Out of them, only 31 got to Lac Rose. And 2 of those were, in fact, tiny Vespa scooters. Piot's gamble paid off. In fact, the way this story ended is truly bittersweet. After his accomplishments, Vespa's sales grew by 150%. For the company, this was a resounding success.
But for Piot, he was still left with a dream of winning the Dakar. Sure, in a car, but a dream nonetheless. He never stopped chasing it, and it's that exact chase that brought him to his end.
While rallying in Morocco, Piot lost control of his Land Rover and plummeted 200 meters into a nearby ravine. He died on the spot, alongside his dream. At 42 years of age, Piot lost his life, pursuing the thing he loved. Thanks for watching.